Hi, Judy. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be in the neighborhood.
Yes, we're both in Texas, so this is a nice interview where you're not across the globe. But just a quick introduction to the listening and watching audience about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Born and raised in South Africa, moved across to the US in about 96. Had my father die, which actually was the catalyst for this because I was in the healthcare arena, but they failed him in all three of the healthcare arenas that I was a specialist in. And he was actually killed in a hospital. And people always say to me, how do you find anything good? Well, he gave me my second career. So I guess that was his final gift. And I take it happily. And so then I morphed into doing family constellations, then organizational constellations, and then getting to a stage where just identifying a pattern wasn't enough. So I moved into my field, which is, and then what? And I'm also an executive coach to Fortune 50 and 500 C-suite, so CEOs, CFOs all over the world. And I'm very, very lucky to have met and worked with some high-profile individuals, a number of them actually. And yeah, I love what I do. I love seeing people wake up and suddenly get who they are.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. Yeah, and my second question is always to check with my audience. The intersection of this podcast relates to spirituality, personal development, and healing. So I'm always curious about where people were plunked into religion or spirituality or nothing at all as a child, and then what are they anchoring themselves in as an adult?
So as a kid, I was super lucky. I had a dad who had studied the Quran, studied the Torah, studied the Bibles because he wanted to know all. His whole thought was you can't sort of just take one and, that's it.
Yes.
And then growing up as kids, we were encouraged to go to church until we got to an age where we started asking questions. And then he said, go do your thing. So, but there was always a thing. Even I was at convent growing up, convent school. And even there, we celebrated all of the religions. And the teacher said to us, don't ever, ever take away someone's religion unless you have something to replace it with. And I thought that was pretty amazing. So I was surrounded by people who said to me, go look, don't be dogmatic, find your way. And then that morphed into, this is fun. How do I help other people find their way too?
Love that, Judy. That is such a rare experience because it has been so dogmatic and like culturally stifling in a lot of religions. And so I love it's really rare that I actually get to hear somebody. I think you might be one of three people on this show that have come here and said that they weren't forced to study one thing and like had to reject it all and like all the things. So thank you for going into to that level of detail. So you wrote a really, really beautiful, interesting book. And like I said before we started recording, this book is all the things that somebody who is on this podcast listening right now would need as a tool to start to deconstruct patterns, ideas about their families, create some healing and understanding. So I was thinking, why don't we just tell the audience what the book is about and what it's called? And then I have some specific questions about the content inside the book. And thank you so much for sending me an advanced copy to look at.
Only with pleasure. I do have one question because I've written two books. Which one are you looking at? Are you looking at decoding your emotional blueprint?
I got the hidden power.
Okay, so the hidden power in your DNA. Right, now we know which one we're talking about.
Okay.
Okay. So what I discovered was in the work that I do, it's called systemic work and constellations, and we'll get into that a bit. It's looking at you within your system because you didn't happen in a vacuum. So you inherit patterns of thoughts, feelings, and actions, which you think are your own. And we all think we've got free will, but no, you don't, not until you know what's living in your system. So then I kind of went on a journey and so what do I do with that? And I stumbled into genealogy intersects exactly with what I do. So you have genealogy 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. Genealogy 1.0 is, hey, here's my family tree. This is how I belong. I came from Louis XIV or whoever it was, and here I am today. And I have these odd idiosyncratic pieces which, if I look at my system, are not idiosyncratic at all. They belong perfectly in my system. And those patterns
Mm-hmm.
are all sent to me so that I can do something with them. So genealogy 1.0, hey, here I am. Genealogy 2.0, let's look at those ancestors and the events that happened in their lives. Were there diasporas, immigrations, abortions, miscarriages, stillbirths? Were there famines? Were there financial disasters? Because all of those then tip into genealogy 3.0, which is you. How did I inherit these patterns? What are they? What am I meant to do with them? How on earth do they form purpose in my life? And what is the adventure? And that's the book.
Yeah, and it's so fascinating. And in the 2.0, I think is when we you to talk about the epigenetics, and that is such a fascinating subject to
Oh,
me. I
absolutely.
my, I myself live in clinical research, so I'm very fascinated by the science and study of that as well. Like, and also like I've read lots of studies. You mentioned the famine piece. I can't remember that really big study that they did in Ireland of the potato famine that happened and how that
Yeah.
actually, and I think also in other European countries, actually, maybe like Ukraine and Hungary or something, but how it really affected the literal physical DNA of the lineages beyond those original, parents that were impacted by that famine. And they
Yeah.
had more genetic markers towards, if they had more food, they would become sicker. And it was just so fascinating.
Yeah. And so there's another one called the Great Dutch Hunger Winter. And it's the Nazis surrounded, you probably know it, surrounded an entire city, or yeah, it was a city. And for about 3 months, they had no access to food or water other than what was there. So they had to eat bulbs and all sorts of nasty things and make do with the water. But again, because it was an intact group, they researched them and they followed them for 4 generations. And what you saw was, depending on when the mother was pregnant, you would have a child that was either obese and had cortisol problems, or a child who was had malnutrition, who had similar problems.
Wild.
But that echoed down for 4 generations, and it's still ongoing. And so for me, and I'm sure for you, the fascinating piece about that is we can have an event, but it's what we make of the event with high
Mm-hmm.
emotion that creates that epigenetic impact that then governs the on-off switches on our genetic coding.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
with that, when you're conscious of what you're doing in a moment that is an event, you actually are busy constructing the future for yourself. And that's huge.
It's huge. I have not read that one, so I definitely will go back. And also that if you understand that imprintation, you can take a different approach to everything. And that's everything, because we, like you said at the top, we're not born or designed in a vacuum. There's patterns and internal and external influences that make us who we are. So I wanted to talk about first the lineage, and when you're looking at patterns, and you talk a lot about just identifying what is limiting and what is not limiting. And sometimes this can be uncomfortable, because if you're a curious person, I was a very curious person in my family. Your book is a good reflection of what I had to do with my life. And so when I started to question the patterns and, like, I would say the culture around my family of how we did things, how we discussed things, it was uncomfortable for the people in my family system and constellation, because nobody wanted to sort of act outside of the box that we were all sort of put in.
Exactly.
So when we think about those patterns and identifying like which ones limit us and which ones are actually good, because you do address that in the book, like not all of them are bad. It's not a polarization here, but can you talk about those patterns and how to identify them and how to start working with what you see as you want to change in those?
Yeah. So I think something that's super important to understand first is that your limiting patterns are often your igniters. So
Mm,
it's a little bit like fear. Fear ignites a lot. Limiting patterns can also ignite a lot. You think about a kid who looks at a parent who's working 3 jobs and they go, I will never do that. And they feel it. I talk about head, heart, gut cohesion, or when the mind tells the body a story that the body can believe. And so what they do is they go, I'm getting the education. I'm moving it forward. So don't ever see what looks like a limiting pattern as a limiter. I mean, we call it that. It's actually an igniter. So how do you look for that? What you want to do is you want to sit down and say, what influences me most in my life right now? Maybe it's relationships. Maybe it's your career. Maybe it's your family. Maybe it's finances. And I want you to write down everything that you think, feel, and do around that subject. And when you've finished, ask yourself, when did that start for me? What was happening in my life at the time? And then, do I have anybody else in the family system who has something similar? Then you'll see if it's a pattern. Now, a lot of people don't have access to all of that genealogy yet, unless they go spit in a bottle. But what you can do if you don't do that is timeline your own life, because you're going to find that there are repeating patterns around that. And you then know they came from somewhere, very likely your lineage, unless you're the first one to do that. So as soon as you've got that limiting pattern, you've now got what wants to stop or change or transform. And that's exciting. That becomes the adventure.
Yes, that's exactly right. All of that is so beautiful to start. Thank you for going into that level of detail of like how you would actually unpack that. One of the other things you also talk about is family constellation. So I think we should maybe, if somebody's not heard this term or how you apply it here, can we maybe just say that? And then I have a specific question about systemic constellations and how that affects
Sure.
us.
So a family constellation, look, I love constellations anyway. It's one of my favorite things to do, especially live. I do a lot via Zoom, but I like the big live events. And so what happens is you come into a setting where there are a whole bunch of people, and you may say, I want to work on issue X. And you sit down next to me and we start talking about issue X. So basically, we're taking a case history. What was it like for you as a kid? What are we doing now? How is it affecting you? What do we want to look at? And then we identify the components of that issue. Maybe it's mom, maybe it's dad, maybe sister is in there, perhaps money is in there, or relationships are in there. And then I will say to the person, I want you to pick a representative for each one of those. So they pick a representative, and then I say to them, give me a spatial picture of that. So they will place those components in relationship to each other. And what you've then done is you've created what Bert Hellinger called a constellation. In other words, an assemblance almost of stars, but it's really just components. But just that does a number of things. It suddenly takes it out of your head and puts it in front of you where you can see it. So now you've got this 3D picture of what it is. Now, the thing that people don't always get is that we're interacting with each other every day. We're in each other's systems every day, and we feel and sense each other's systems every day. And this
Yes.
is no exception. So I start asking questions, and you may see one of those representatives move or look down or look away. Maybe dad's looking off into the distance, and I will say to the person, what's going on with dad? Oh, well, he never came back from the war. So we'll place another representative for war. And so you get this 3D interactive moving piece that unfolds. And suddenly people are going, oh, wait, I remember when. And the language comes up. So we're dealing with language, thoughts, feelings, actions. But because we're also dealing with your senses, your hearing, your vision, your touch, suddenly you start to have an embodied experience of your system. And then when we have the conversations start to complete, actions start to complete, and you see where that came from. Maybe it was 3 generations back, and you can look at that and go, oh, that sadness doesn't belong to me. The anguish or the depression doesn't belong to me. It came from there and it cycled down. My job is to change that and bring joy. So you then become the change agent, and that wiring starts to happen throughout the body. And of course, then you've got the neuroscience, you're rewiring the brain in the moment. So it's fairly intense for that person, but it's a little bit like the opposite of a traumatic imprint. You know
Right.
that if something traumatic happens to you, you feel it in the moment. You could describe the thoughts, the feelings, the actions, the colors. This is no exception, but it's the opposite. It's the
Hmm.
transformational reframe of what had happened and what now can happen.
I love the way you're explaining all of this. It's so succinct and so clear and so real. And that embodiment aspect that you talked about, that is so significant, because most of the times we're also just telling ourselves all of these unverified stories about what has
Right.
happened in the past without looking at it, from a compassionate standpoint, but also with a little bit more context. We have more context and understanding for what's happened to our families, then we can apply a different viewpoint to it. And on that um idea, I really wanted also to talk about, like, I think you address in the book as well, I think it was in this section of the constellations, when we think about the trauma, the patterns, the dysfunction that sits in our lineage from the past. And then there's everything that's happening interrelationally in real time, and sort of digging through all of that and trying to figure out, what's yours and what's theirs, and how it's shaped you as a person. And this I think can feel very overwhelming. Like you were just explaining, like it's so intensive. There's so much work. How would you encourage somebody to hold both of those ideas, the old and the new stuff that's happening, and try to work with it in parallel and not get too, and stick with it and not get too exhausted in the process?
Okay, so here's what I say to people when they say, "This is a lot of work." I said to them, no, you do a lot of work every day to stay stuck. So do you want to keep doing the work you're doing every day to stay stuck? Or do you want to have an adventure and let's see what's on the other side here? And
Okay,
so,
you need
so
to like trademark that statement. You do a lot to stay stuck.
I'll trademark it right after the
Okay.
program. But yeah,
Okay.
we really do. We're so good at trash talking ourselves. Oh my goodness. And by the way, often the trash talking comes from the patterns or the ancestors before. Be careful, don't do that, watch out, you're stupid, we're all dumb at math, don't da. It's when you start to say, I want that. And that's my purpose and goal. And I want that adventure. And you start investing in that. And it's more exciting than where you're stuck, that it pulls you all the way past the excuses and into where you want to be. So the most important piece is to say to people, really identify something that's super important to you. Don't let it go. It doesn't matter if it takes you a day, a week, a year, a couple of years. Don't let it go, because if you keep investing in that, you'll keep moving towards it. And so a really easy example of that was, I moved here. I'd been to Disney World once and thought it was incredible. And I'm a big Disney person. Anybody who knows me knows I'm a big Disney fan. I wear Disney. I love it. I teach there. And so I decided I wanted timeshare at Disney, because I looked at all the happy people walking out of the timeshare, and I wanted to do that with my family. So I knew it wasn't going to happen overnight. In fact, my first thought was, you're crazy. You're never going to get that. It's so expensive. But what I did was I opened an envelope and I wrote on that. And every time I got a little bit extra or we were doing something, I would tuck just a little bit away. And one day my brother said to me a couple of years later, I want to come and visit. And I said, I'll help with the accommodation. And I thought, oh, let me go and have a look at my envelope. And when I opened it and counted, there was enough money for a solid down payment for timeshare. So I'd held it and kept going with it. And I will tell you, every time I put $1 or $5 in there, it was so exciting because I knew what I was going for. So it's helpful to make your life exciting, or to have a deep,
Mhm.
deep desire, because it really forward anchors us. It starts creating forward memories, and we know
Yeah.
what it feels like to want to be there. And so we will go there.
Yeah, and it gives us like a very solid plan for creating a different life for ourselves and for our lineage. And taking that pivot every time is just so significant. I wondered, when you were doing this work, or even in any work that you've done related to this, if you found that there was a pattern in the people who wanted to become change agents. Like, what did you discover out about people who were interested in doing this work? I'm really curious.
Yeah, I have two things. Two things. One, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired of being sick and tired. There's got to be more to life than this. So that was one lot. But the other lot who were like, you know what? Life's an adventure. And I know there are ups and downs because that's how adventures go. But I want something bigger than I have right now. And they stumbled into wants, which we're taught not to have, but are actually the secret ingredient for getting to where you want to be. The more wants you have and the more excited you are about the wants you have, or the more determined you are, the further you'll get. So it was those two mostly. And then and other people who would say, well, I want just a little bit more. And I would go, why? Well, we shouldn't want too much. Why? And so I think they would sort of buddy themselves up to, well, I guess I could have a bigger one. Good plan.
Well, and the idea of disempowerment in family lineages takes on so many different shapes and sizes. Like for me, I grew up, well, I was adopted when I was 5 into a family that was like very disempowering. And so I already had disempowerment from my life in foster care, which was really crazy and traumatic. But coming into that family, the disempowerment and like the constant limitation of thoughts and ideas and like what you could become and what you could strive for and the relationship with money and all of these things. And it's so interesting that, like you said back there about the trash talking, we also disempower ourselves so much about what is possible because, and it's an echo of what's been told to us since we were young. It's probably things we don't even believe for ourselves. I know for me, I definitely, once I broke away from my lineage and the kind of the cultural mores of my family, my life became incredibly different, and really, really beautiful as well. So I'd say I'm in that second bucket you talked about.
I
Is
want to talk to you though. I want to stop you
yeah,
right
tell
there
me.
because you're a very interesting person. So my daughter is
Thanks.
also adopted. And what
Oh,
I've
okay,
found with
cool.
adoptees is that they can be middle of the road, but they generally tend to fall into, it doesn't matter how much I do, I'll never belong. I'm doomed. And they fall out of line into the ditch. Or they look at all of this and they go, you know what? I've got plus. I've got two sets of parents. I've got a plus, and I'm going to do, because the more I do, the more I'll belong. So I'm going to become a hyper performer. In fact, I will create places for people to belong because I know how to do that. That's you.
That's
Yeah,
me. That's 100% me. And I'm one of 8 in my biological siblings, and that exact, spectrum, all of them fall into it. Some have fallen and some have arisen. It's really,
exactly.
really
And it's
fascinating.
important to realize, the most important thing to realize is you're at choice. You made the choice. Nobody else did it for you. You made the choice. And every single one of us has that. We're at
Hmm.
choice. It doesn't matter how horrible things are. We're at choice. I had somebody who was raped who came to see me and said, there was no choice. I had no choice. I said, yeah, you did. She said to me, what choice did I have? I said, what did you choose? She said, the only thing I could choose was to live. I said, you were at choice. You could have chosen to die. You didn't. We are always, always at choice.
Yeah, I think also too, and I don't know if you want to say this is a little bit tangential, excuse me, from this conversation. I don't know if you have anything to say to this. I think there's also, if we're just talking about like what happens to us versus like that idea of like life is happening for us versus life is happening to us. I also think that when you endure a lot of hard things, there is an idea that your free will is taken away. And
Right.
there might be these micro moments where like in that case of the rape case, like you're overpowered, you're trying to fight back, you can't, like there's all these things. But what you do after that, like you said, it's really interesting to me how we end up trying to pull ourselves out of that. Like what do you see for people who make that decision to try to pull out of those things and alchemize what has happened to them and try to be be different from that experience?
So 2 things to say. One, if you look at 2 men in an accident who are both paralyzed from the neck down, one says my life is over, the other one says I have purpose. Both are right. They've made the choice.
Wow.
So for people who've been in really bad positions, and by the way, if they think my life's been a bed of roses, no, it hasn't. But it's in those moments can I dig in and go, I have a choice. I will get there. I am moving. It doesn't matter how slow it is. It doesn't matter how painful it is. If you keep moving and you keep making choices, and you keep, by the way, even if it's been super painful, making choices for joy, you're going to teach your
Right.
spirit how to bounce back to joy. And that's easy to say when you're in those
Yeah.
moments. I remember when my mom was diagnosed with cancer. It was such a shock. I walked outside into the hallway and I can remember thinking, I'm going to die too. I can't do this. It's too hard. I really can't. I'm going right after her. This is unbelievable. I just can't. And in that moment, I went, stop. Listen to the choices you're making right now with your thoughts and your feelings and your actions, because the choices you're making right now with these heightened emotions are about to create your future. What do you want to do? I think if I could give that to everybody, I would say when life is beating you down and you really feel smashed, you've got to look for the joy. I don't care if it's 10 seconds a day. Look for the joy. Start flexing that muscle. Start looking at your capability. Start looking at your wants. Start looking at your joy. It doesn't matter how smashed you are, because you, in those moments, are creating that epigenetic imprint. What do you want it to look like? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's about to become your future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so powerful. It cannot be understated what that is. I did want to talk to you also just one more item, I think, in the flow of 2.0 in the book is ancestral patterns and the 3 principles. Can you tell us what the 3 principles are? And then I have some questions about that.
Sure. In all living systems, you'll find they're governed by 3 principles, and anytime you have an issue, it will resolve into one of those 3: belonging, balance of give and receive, and order. So you want to have a look at it. Am I out of order? In other words, am I out of place? Am I too big or too little? In other words, was there a situation in my family where I suddenly had to grow up, or did I have to disappear? And how do I regain that? Do I give too much? Do I receive too much or take too much? If I give too much, by the way, I can destroy relationships, because if I keep giving and I don't receive, other people feel unable to be around us because you've got it all together. I have nothing to give you. So there's that. And then belonging, which is the most important one. It's the basic one for all of us. Do I belong? Do I not belong? Sometimes, like you may step out of line with a family. And again, I want to refer to something there. You may step out of line with a family. It doesn't mean that you don't belong. You're actually stepping ahead. So you're not
Oh, I
stepping
love
away
that.
from, you're stepping ahead. You're expanding the system and showing what more is possible. You very much belong, but you belong now as a pioneer. So those 3 are important. Anything in your life, have a look and you'll see you're either out of order, your balance of give and receive is shot, or you have an issue with your belonging. In your case, not only do you have double belonging, you create belonging. So belonging has become one of those yes things in your life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think at the beginning of the book, you talk about an example of somebody who was struggling with isolation. And I know from in my experience, when I started to reject sort of the family patterns in my system, I became isolated because I wouldn't be part of their church and the things they believed in, and I got divorced and all of these things that my family didn't agree with, and that isolation was really real. This is not the same example in the book, but it ties into the idea of belonging, because then I did have to try to figure out, like, well, where do I belong?
Right.
And I love the way you phrase it. I could have used that like 12 years ago, Judy. That would have been
Oh,
perfect. I've got it now, but I've gone through it now, but that's such a beautiful way to explain it, because I essentially, and I talk a lot about this on the podcast when we talk about like alchemizing our healing and our trauma and all of this stuff, like creating new systems and families and ways of belonging that support us in a really healthy and affirming way. And if you reject your family system that isn't going to change, or whatever, it could be your work system, it could be something else that you don't want to go along with, or it feels wrong to you, or you have some idea that you want something different, you still have to create something new for yourself. And I love the way you just described that there. It was really
yeah. And
beautiful.
you also cannot not belong in your family system. Just
Mm-hmm.
something to be aware of. You literally cannot not belong. You belong.
Yeah.
It's we feel like we don't belong. So one of the things that's important is never rejecting your family system. So I just wanted to go into that a little bit.
Yeah. That nuance. Yeah.
Yeah, it's you're not rejecting. What you're saying is, I can't live in this limited piece. I have to expand. But you
Right.
never
Right.
reject for one reason. It's not because you're good, bad, or whatever it is. It's because your family system has keys to your future. All of the things
Mm,
in the past that are do's and don'ts, and you want that information. So you don't want to reject them. What you're saying is, I can't be limited anymore. I have to
mm-hmm.
expand. And so you're the forerunner for the system. Later
Right.
on,
Because then you
many
blind
years down the,
yourself.
yep, many years
Mm-hmm.
down the line, or many generations, they'll go, but she did, and I can. So
Yeah.
you're actually the forerunner and the pioneer for that whole system.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. You can't cut it all off, because then you blind yourself to the information you
Exactly
need
right.
to change. Yeah. That's very, very, very important. Thank you. So shifting to 3.0 of the book, you wrote this really fascinating in that section about meta patterns, which I thought was just like so smart, so bright. I don't think I've ever heard anyone describe about these meta patterns that we encounter throughout our lived experience. So I wondered if we could explain what that is in the book, and then I have a question about that.
Sure. So the first thing to know about meta patterns is those are the ones that kind of govern the world, or govern big cultures or big demographics. Money doesn't grow on trees. Only greedy people have money. Money's a big one, and money's one of my,
Money is so big for so many
it's
people.
huge. And I love money. I have a deal with money where I've told it, I will teach people how to love you in a really positive way, because it is a kind, strong force, and a very strong disciplinarian and mentor, but it is a living, breathing force, and it will show
Hmm.
up for you the way that you show up for it. So it's not a commodity, it's a relationship. So we have
Hmm.
money with all of the things that people say that, by the way, are not true. You can bust all of those myths. Relationships. You shouldn't, well, one of the big ones is monogamy, and then multiple wives and things. That's a meta pattern. We operate within that meta pattern. Careers. Women can't have equal careers. Yeah, no, not true. What are other things about that? Oh, you can't have it all. Yeah, you can. I don't know who said you couldn't, but yes, you can. You've just got to know how to work it. You can have
Hmm.
love or money. Really? No, that's a big meta pattern. And with those meta patterns, we put limits around ourselves. I can only give so many hours a day, therefore I'm going to be poor forever. Seriously now? No. Smart people do that all the time. They've learned to grow into that place. So it's looking at what society says, or what my culture says, or what the big global groups say, and asking, is that true? Is that really true? Okay, we've had studies about it, yay, but we've had studies about it from a limited mindset. If we
Hmm.
all suddenly decided, you know what, we can all be wealthier, we can all be happier and healthier, oh my goodness, can you imagine what would happen in this population? If everybody decided tomorrow, we're all going to do just 5 squats a day, just 5 minutes of meditation a day, just 5 minutes of health a day, we would improve exponentially. the whole purpose of this work is to show people how to level up, really
Mm-hmm.
level up, and show themselves that they are not limited beings at all. We have
Mm-hmm.
infinite capabilities within, and all you've got to know is how to use the system to be able to keep leveling up and moving to that next level.
Yeah, I mean that I think it's such an important like piece of all of the topics you're talking about in the book to think about if you want to shift anything, like once you deal with your family, once you deal with what you have inside yourself, there's just this one more layer that you need to consider. And again, not to say that this is hard or exhaustive or anything like that, but it's important because you could do all this work and then head out into the field of your life and basically encounter these cultural barriers, and then you give up or you get stuck again. And so I really love that you paid attention to that and how it influences us on a regular basis. And I think one of the big things which you hit on was the idea of the money, but then also like the work and success, because I think a lot of people struggle with, they want success, but culturally, wherever they lie or whatever beliefs are set in them, whether they're women, men, or how they identify, you can really encounter some struggles to try to combat whatever is being told to you. I know for me, when in my career, at one point when offices were changing to like open concept offices, remember
Right?
that it was sort of happened like late 2010, something like that. So this was, I would say, around 2015, and we moved our offices to this new open concept, and the entire C-suite was, oh, you could see it from the entire floor. So we've had, I'm talking like 12 offices, and I remember sitting in my desk and looking around and being like, there's no women and there's nobody of color in those offices. This is
Right.
so strange. Like, will I ever get there? Like, and that's an example of like, challenging those meta ideas, because in reality, that's what I'm seeing, right? But put me in another business that's women led, or, led by people of color, that's more diverse, then my reality changes as well. And it is possible.
Absolutely. Or you look at that C-suite there and you go, huh, I want to be there. And it ignites that. Here's where I go. I'm going to be interacting with them, and then I'm going to be a C-suite. And if you're determined enough, you're
Mm-hmm.
going to get there. And the beautiful thing about that is we then start telling ourselves those stories, right? I'm going to do that. I'm
Right.
going to college to get that degree because I'm going to sit in those offices.
Right.
And we keep transformation talking ourselves up. Here's the thing that we forget to do. Let's suppose we looked at the C-suite and it's only these white men and we cast them as the villains, which unfortunately we tend to do, but we cast them as the villains. Guess what? When you get to the C-suite over there, who do you have to thank? Those men, because they're the one who ignited the passion in you. And we forget to do that. I have a thing that I do quite often where I will say to people, who is the villain in your life to whom you owe thanks?
Mm. Yeah.
Because a lot of times we use somebody and go, I will never be like you, or I'm coming for that position. And we forget to thank them. They're the ones who ignited it.
That is so true. I definitely have had that. I mean, some big motivators of changing my behavior and my patterns in my family were directed at one specific person. So I love that you said that. I love that you said that. Okay, well, I'm really mindful of, we're getting close to the end here. So, any other major things? I think I asked you all my questions, but like anything else that we want to tell the audience about this work that you do, maybe not just in this book or in general, that would be important for them to think about, and then picking up this book as well to, re-emphasize what we talked about today.
Yeah, picking up the book's important. It's going to wake you up. And I don't mean to imply that everybody's asleep, but
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we need just a little bit of a tweak to reality. And things go, whoa, I hadn't seen it that way. So that's number one. I would say attending a live event is something that will change your life forever. It will. And I have one in November 1 through 4 at Disney World. because I do it in the heart of magic. And so people get to start transforming, which is soul magic, and then leveling up. What else do I want them to know? There are also specific constellations meditations that I created with the same person who does Joe Dispenza's music. He co-created that with me, and they're really helpful. They walk you all the way through a guided meditation constellation, so you get a feel for what it is, and you can really anchor it very well. And I think what I want them most to know is that life really, really is a big adventure. It's really an adventure. You have two things that you've got to do. One is ask yourself, what do I want? What do I want? What do I really want? And number two thing is make your want so exciting that you can't resist going for it. I think that's super important. And yeah, there might be another spit in the bottle, see where your ancestors came from. Really good idea, because you can then go and look at what were the broad events that may have shaped you. And now you're starting to climb levels and ladders as a person.
Yeah, so powerful. So you've got that retreat coming up, but then how can everyone connect with you online, social media? Do you have a YouTube page?
Oh,
Are you on
absolutely. I have a
TikTok? Where are you?
the whole lot, all of them.
Okay.
YouTube, TikTok, big on Spotify, big on YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. Have I
All the
forgotten any?
places.
All of them. I'm all over it. I had, in fact, a school friend pop up from first grade who said, "You just kept coming up and coming up." So I'm pretty
Oh.
much everywhere. And then my first book, I would say pick up the first book as well, Decoding Your Emotional Blueprint. It's a bestseller. It was featured in Psychology Today. Very, very well received. It's translated into, I believe, 7 languages at this point. And it really teaches you again, where did you come from? What's happening? How do you level up? What do you do to grow and expand your spirit? And please don't think, I would say my final piece would be transformation isn't for the chosen few. It's for those who choose it.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, I always end in some gratitude with my guests. So I always want to check in with you. What 3 things you're grateful for this week, this year, sort of anything that's rolling around in your heart chakra today.
Oh, wow. I'm grateful for a lot. I do a lot of gratitude walks as it happens. Always grateful for my family. That's my number one. Grateful for the magic and Disney. Super grateful because it really shaped my life. I'm very much into magic of the soul. How far can we go? So always super grateful for that. And then really, really grateful for a career that I never saw coming because I wanted something bigger. I am so grateful I get to work with some of the most incredible people on the planet, some of the wealthiest people on the planet, who, by the way, are some of the kindest people on the planet. And great gratitude for what I see at the moment, which is I think I see kindness creeping back in. And that is awesome.
Mm-hmm. Well, Judy, I love you. I think you're wonderful. I think that your work is incredible. It's so necessary and needed. And especially something we didn't talk about is just when we think about DNA, and I don't know if you addressed this in your first book, but in the human experience, one thing I learned in my experience is we're not static beings. We are meant to evolve and to change and to grow and to transform and to be some different iteration of ourselves as life changes around us. And I love that you also address that in your book. And I think you're
Yeah.
so wonderful. I'm so grateful you're doing all of this work, and it's so necessary and it's so needed so that we can wake up and we can expand and we can know something different something else is possible for our, from our beginning limited view to an expansive, really possible view. So I love that you're doing all of this. Thank you for coming here today.
Thank you so much. I think just to say that, you don't just inherit your physical DNA, you inherit your emotional DNA. That's what you were referring to. And that's my work. You inherit your emotional DNA, which is your pattern of thoughts, feelings, and actions. You inherit them so that you can be the change agent and tweak them.
Beautiful. Well, we'll end there. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you for having me. And I'm so glad we were so close to each other.
Yeah.
This podcast was written, directed, and produced by me, your host, Krista Ziomata, in alignment with Light Casting. Music curated and created by Mr. Pixie. You can find I'm Awake Now What on all social media channels by searching IANW Podcast. Head over to your favorite podcast app and subscribe, download, rate, and review. Come back every Sunday to partake in a new and enlightening conversation. May you be filled with love and light until we meet again.